So, Dr. Susanne Knowles, she's the chair, she's the founder of the Australian Institute of Professional Coaches. She's a psychologist, educator, executive coach, and author. She holds a master's degree in education, psychology, and business administration. And she's recently completed a PhD researching how organizations develop a coaching culture. Susanne previously held senior executive positions in large government and private sector organisations, and in a consulting capacity, provided executive coaching services to senior executives and board members. She's held board positions in government, not-for-profit, and professional service firms. As a psychologist, Susanne has experience in providing counselling and therapeutic interventions across a range of personal and family issues. Her first book, which I have, is called Positive Psychology Coaching. It's available on Amazon.com. You need to get a copy of it. And she's writing a second book right now, and it'll be ready soon. It's called Transforming Organizational Culture Through Coaching. So that's her bio. But once again, this is an amazing lady that has come into my life, and she is someone who fits my values and ethics. She is a passionate person about the topics that we're talking about. She's in it to help others. She works tirelessly. She's done the work she's done to get her PhD, whilst everything else that she's doing is just phenomenal. And I'm going to allow her to share with you and bring her on now. You don't need to hear anything more from me. Please help me welcome Dr. Susanne Knowles.
Thank you very much, Grant, for that kind introduction. Yes, I think I'm live now. Is that right? Can you hear me now, loud and clear?
Okay. Yep. Away you go.
And thank you, everybody, for joining in this presentation. I was bowled over by Laura's presentation on social emotional intelligence and its association with positive psychology. And as you will hear from me in my presentation, my focus of positive psychology is on coaching. And that's been developed as I've been doing my executive coaching and consulting, also academic lecturing. So basically what I would call myself is a pracademic. So what I've discovered and tried to uncover over the years is my passion is coaching, as you may understand from my book, etc. But what I wanted to do is delve into the evidence for coaching, because it's a relatively new field. It's an emerging field of practice and not yet a discipline in its own right. So that's where my research has been, trying to uncover the evidence for coaching from traditional psychology, which I'll go into a little bit further in a short while. But also then talk about positive psychology as it has evolved from that traditional psychology approaches, and also then look at the application of both of these traditional and positive psychology research and findings to coaching. Now, as I go through the presentation, there's going to be a fair bit of content, unfortunately, to give a background for the evidence for coaching. So I'm going to refer to some of my notes as I go through, and maybe you would like to take some notes as well. But also because of my practitioner experience, I hope to give you some key principles of positive psychology that you can apply to practice. And so that's the content of it. In terms of the context, I deal with coaching. You may not be a coach, and that's okay, because these principles of positive psychology can apply to anyone, anywhere, anytime. Basically, how we relate to each other in the environment, how we understand each other, support each other, motivate each other. And so any application I have to clients in coaching, please just refer that to yourself in your workplace, in your life, basically. The third thing I'd like you to listen for as we go through the presentation is the impact. So the impact of some of these approaches and principles that may impact on you and your life. And when you go out there to practice some of these techniques, such as mindfulness, for example, which is one of the key aspects of positive psychology, how are you then feeling about the impact, which comes back to social and emotional intelligence. And as Grant has said, state the emotion. So they're the three areas I'm going to look at: the traditional psychology, the positive psychology, the research and understanding for coaching, and finally the application in terms of principles of positive psychology to coaching practice. So let's start first of all by looking at what is psychology. And I shall go to my slides to take you through that. So what is psychology? Psychology is a study of human behaviour and the mental processes that allow us to learn, function and respond to various situations in our lives. And notice the word respond, okay? So Grant was talking earlier about reaction, and we're not talking about reaction, we're talking about how we can transform reaction into action and response. So there's the first slide. It's about human behaviour, mental processes that allow us to respond to various situations in our lives. So really it's concerned with how we gather information from the environment, how we make sense of it given our experience and our background, and then how we act or react to that situation. So the goal of psychological research is basically to understand what motivates people, what makes them tick. The goal of positive psychological research is then how to find out ways to bring greater happiness into their lives. So the evidence for coaching is based on traditional psychological research, which looks at about 6 branches of psychology. And these include behavioural psychology, which I'll discuss shortly, cognitive psychology, developmental, humanistic, personality and social psychology, each of which I'll go through and explain in a little while their application to coaching. Let me also note that psychology is both an academic and an applied field of research. And when it's applied, it can be applied in, say, 4 basic clinical settings, such as clinical settings, like hospitals and mental and health institutions, educational settings, for example, in schools and universities where I lectured and worked as an educational psychologist, in counselling settings, such as family relations centres, where I worked with family dysfunction, domestic violence and abuse, and in organisational settings, where I worked as an executive coach and consultant, supporting executives in the execution of their roles and the resolution of their personal issues. And as Laura was mentioning, you know, everybody has personal issues, no matter what their role and where they're working. So when you're working as a coach, oftentimes it's about looking at the personal issues. For example, the teenager might have been expelled from school, or they might have aged parents that they're caring for, or there might be illness in the family. So you need to look behind the actual presenting issue and look beyond into the person and what's happening for the person at that level. So from a coaching perspective, all of these branches of psychology contribute to how coaches work to assist clients to develop a better life. So let me take you through each of those 6 branches of psychology that I mentioned and how they contribute to our understanding of coaching and working with individuals and helping them to have happier lives. First of all, behavioural psychology, as Laura mentioned, goes back 120 or 150 years. It was the first branch of psychology that at that stage scientists investigated to look at how people behave, because it's concerned with observable, visible behaviours. It's what you see. And a lot of times it's what you see is what you get. But as we know from behavioural research, what you see can be changed. Behaviour can be changed. So scientists such as Watson and his colleagues demonstrated how behaviour can be changed by conditioning new responses in relation to a specific stimulus, such as when they unfortunately evoked fear in a baby called the Little Albert experiments, who was approached by a rabbit and later by a white rat, which they linked with a loud sound. And of course that frightened him and caused him to develop a phobia. So that's conditioning responses. Skinner showed how behaviour can be changed by reward and punishment, which is still used today in a lot of particularly corporate and also parental environments. So he developed what he called the Skinner box, in which a rat learned to push a lever to get food, and that was the reward. Thankfully, neither of those techniques are used in coaching today, but rather this research tells us that behaviour is not fixed and can be changed as a result of learning new information, trying out new behaviours, and reinforcing successful behaviours. And what you'll learn later on is about the neural pathways that develop as we develop patterns of behaviour that can be learned and unlearned, and behavioural loops that can be changed as well. So in contrast, the cognitive psychologists are concerned with the inner world, not the outer observable world, but the inner world, how people acquire, process and store information. They study a person's inner states such as attention, perception, memory, motivation, problem solving and decision making. And today, cognitive psychology addresses clients' mental models and mindsets that either support and encourage or can hinder and hold back the acquisition of desired goals by identifying clients' limiting beliefs and reframing negative thoughts into positive aspirations. The third area of traditional psychological research related to developmental psychology. And Laura mentioned people such as Binet, who developed the first intelligence test, Dewey, who worked in educational fields, and Piaget, who worked with children. So developmental psychologists are concerned with how people learn, grow, and develop, which is the aim of coaching. What we know from more recent research is that people who believe that their ability to change is fixed will behave in different ways from those who believe that they have some control over their ability to learn, change, and improve. And that's the basis of what we do when we coach people. We want them to change their behaviour because what they're doing at the moment is not working for them. And so to be more effective in life, in communication, in relationships, is all about being willing to change their behaviour. Now, those three areas of psychological research were prominent in the first half of the 19th century. Come about the 1950s, and we see the first ray of looking at people as people, or looking at people potentially as in a positive approach. And so we have the emergence of what's called humanistic psychology. And this is renowned by people such as Carl Rogers, who coined the phrase unconditional positive regard. So that was regard for the human being and for what they were doing, whether it was right or wrong, but it was serving a purpose for them. And it was serving indeed what Maslow would call needs or wants. So whether they needed to behave in a certain way or wanted to behave in a certain way. And so simply what we've got there is a fundamental belief in people that are innately good and that their mental and social problems are simply the result of deviations from that normal inclination to be good. What we have then is also a psychologist working around the Jungian theory, which also has contributed to humanistic psychology, to uncover the unique characteristics of people's thoughts, feelings, and behaviours that make them unique. So they looked at the traits and the characteristics of people, good, bad, or ugly, and how those traits can be aggregated into types of personality. And out of that, we get things like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, then the DISC assessment of personality, leading up to more modern personality assessments like leadership circle and other assessment instruments which look at, say, leadership behaviour and how leaders can change their behaviour to be more positive in their environment. And last but not least of the traditional psychologists is the social psychologist. And they focus on the impact that the social environment and group interactions have on individual attitudes and behaviours. So they try to understand and explain how individual thoughts, feelings and behaviours are influenced by observational learning of group and social events, either real, imagined or implied by other human beings. So examples of the influence of social psychology on behaviour include, for example, the Bandura Bobo doll experiment, where in the 1970s he exposed children at Stanford in three groups. One to adults actually playing aggressively with a Bobo doll, males and females, hitting and being aggressive. A second group was just allowed to play and the Bobo doll was there in their presence. And the third group was the control group and they were just playing and with no interaction at all. And what he found was that those children in the group who had been exposed to the aggressive play with the Bobo doll then subsequently became more aggressive in their play with the Bobo doll than did children in the other two groups. You might also remember the Stanford prison experiment of Zimbardo in the 1970s, which had to be stopped. And this was where psychology experiments recruited psychology students into two groups. One were prisoners and one were the guards. And the guard's behaviour became so punitive and so negative that they had to stop the experiment. In a coaching setting, what we do is we work with the client to change their behaviour, but we know that they go back into the same social context. So in addition to helping them to make changes and activate different behaviours, we also talk with them about what's likely to happen when they go back into their social group and how we can then give them scenarios for how they might respond to those different reactions. Because when people want to change their behaviour, oftentimes it changes the whole social system in which they are interacting. And other people in that social system become uncomfortable and try to bring them back to what they consider to be the normal behaviour of that person. And so it's logical that they will have discomfort, the other people in that social system, and may not be supportive of the new behaviours. So it's important that we acknowledge that whenever one person changes their behaviour, it will have a ripple effect into their social environment, and others may be caused discomfort as a result of that. So those are the 6 branches of traditional psychology that impact on and provide the foundational evidence for coaching as we know it today. However, there is a problem with traditional psychology in that it was focused on deviance, abnormality, and dysfunction, the things that are going wrong with a person's life. There was no consideration given to the rest of humanity, the rest of the population, which provided the majority, say the other 80, 90% of human beings who were functioning normally, quote unquote, for the most part, although they may have been living unhappy lives. And if you look at some of the research out of the US into happiness and unhappiness and the proportion of people who are happy, what we do see is that only about a third of the US population describe themselves as happy, which leaves a gaping 70% or 70% who are unhappy, some of whom may be mentally disturbed. But the great majority would just be simply unhappy. That is, able to get out of their discomfort, pessimism, into being more happy and being more optimistic. And the research has correlated that unhappiness factors with things such as, it has not correlated with income or gender. It's certainly not correlated with anything that can be you can put your hand on, except, as Seligman would say later on, if we are ill, we can certainly be happy, but when a second illness hits us, which is quite devastating, that may actually lead us to become unhappy, which is obviously something that we need to consider later on. But the correlation with happiness is found to not be related to income or to gender. However, it has been related to things such as the age groups of the 20s. So people in their 20s seem to be happier, and people in their 60s seem to be happier. And maybe that's due to, impending retirement or something like that, or having lived their life and now being able to relax a little more. It's also been related to traits such as extroversion, but also to an inner peace and calmness that comes from spirituality. And people who are happier have been correlated with living longer. As Laura mentioned, they're healthier, they live longer, they engage in more altruistic behaviours and more acts of random kindness. So what we now will look at is how contemporary psychological practice can be of benefit to more broadly the normal human population. And there we go to entering into positive psychology. So positive psychology is the scientific study of what makes life most worth living. In other words, it's about what's going right in one's life and building on that to achieve greater happiness. The focus is on identifying people's strengths instead of their weaknesses and building on these strengths rather than trying to repair the deficits. In other words, taking the lives of average people to great, and instead of focusing solely on assisting those who are struggling to regain normal. So positive psychology is concerned with 3 things. It's concerned with positive experiences that we have in life and replicating those again and again to get those endorphins going. and generating extreme happiness. So putting yourself in a position where you are creating happiness in your life, whether that's going out for a picnic, whether it's being with family and friends, whether that's engaging in your favourite pursuit, out of work pursuit, or even in work pursuit, if that's what you find happiness in. The second thing it's related to is positive states of mind. So that's just putting yourself in an optimistic position, being grateful for your life and what's happening in your life, having compassion for others, and having a hopeful mental outlook that things are good and can even get better. And this is correlated with increased life satisfaction, with greater well-being, increased self-esteem, and increased self-confidence, that you are able to function happily in your life. And the third thing it's correlated with is positive settings. So, for example, if you're working in an organisation or an institution which applies positive psychology principles, you will be happier. And that's why a lot of new age people today entering work environments will be setting out to discover what's the environment like before they actually decide to apply for a job in that environment. Now, Csikszentmihalyi was one of the first contemporary psychologists to have a look at things like happiness and creativity back in the 1990s. He studied happiness, optimal experience. He looked at the evolving self and how we can evolve into more positive human beings. And he, in particular, looked at the concept of flow, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. He later then teamed up with Martin Seligman, in the 2000s, to write the first introductory text to positive psychology. But getting back to Csikszentmihalyi, he's probably most noted for his concept of flow. Now, you would know, as he discovered when he looked at artists. Artists can be immersed in what they're doing. They can be immersed for hours on end. Their time can pass without even noticing it. They are so involved in what they were doing in the moment, as Grant and Laura have referred to, being present, fully present in that moment, and not even noticing that they need to eat, they need to sleep. They are so concentrated and focused on what they're doing. And this is the stage that he said is called flow. So there are 6 characteristics, and I've mentioned some of them already, but just let me reiterate those. Being present in the moment, where action and awareness merges, and so you're fully concentrating and present in the task. There is a lack of attention to self, for example, sleeping and eating. There is a sense of personal control of the situation, totally in control of the situation, but a distorted sense of time as it passes and not even noticing it. Experiencing the activity as intrinsically rewarding. And by that, and I should have mentioned that before from a behaviourist perspective, intrinsic motivation is motivation from interior, from ourselves, being proud in what we're doing, being urged on by our own success. It's not having to relate to others and not getting rewards from others. So it's got nothing to do with others. It's about, yes, we like what we're doing, we love what we're doing, and we want to keep doing it because it's just so rewarding and finding that achievement internally within ourselves. However, it really is Seligman who is considered to be the father of contemporary positive psychology. Seligman grew frustrated with traditional psychology's overemphasis on the negative. So much attention was paid to mental illness, to abnormal psychology, trauma, suffering and pain, and relatively little attention was paid to happiness, to well-being, exceptionalism, strengths, and flourishing. So when he was elected president of the American Psychological Society in 1998, he jumped at the opportunity to alter the direction of the field from such an influential position. He proposed a new branch of psychology with a focus on what is life-giving rather than what is life-taking. His published work addresses areas, and I want to focus on 3 of these areas in addition to what Laura has mentioned. So 3 pivotal areas that we look at in coaching, and these are, first of all, learned helplessness. So this is a state in which an individual fails to act because of prior negative experiences. The example that's given from a experimental point of view is of an animal who is caged, and then every time the animal tries to escape from the cage, they are mistreated, and they run quickly back into their cage until they get to a state where the door of the cage is opened and they do not even try to escape. So we can relate that to today's situations, particularly in relation to domestic violence, where the victim just remains in that state for a long period of time. But even to things like what's happening today with the reluctance to, say, apply for promotion. If you have been unsuccessful several times, you tend to give up. And even with school children who have not been successful with exams, have exam anxiety. After a while, they tend to give up and say, I'm not going to be any good, I'm not going to do any good at this exam, therefore I won't even try. So that's learned helplessness. And as coaches, we look at those limiting beliefs and the assumptions underlying them and try to take that person into a more positive mental state so that they start to believe in themselves and what they can do rather than focus on what they can't do. Seligman's second major contribution was in explicating the difference between pessimism and optimism. So he proposed that when we are unhappy, we ask ourselves three critical questions, and these relate to permanence, pervasiveness, and personalisation. So the questions that he encourages us to ask ourselves is this situation permanent? Is it going to be with me for the rest of my life? So just let me give you an example, which, for example, a car accident where somebody is disabled, in a wheelchair, unable to walk. And of course, that's a permanent situation. So yes, that's a setback. However, that person can still be optimistic because they have the use of their upper limbs. They can speak, they can walk, they can talk, they can create art, they can write, they can play music. So there is gratitude that can still relate to that unfortunate accident. Is the situation pervasive? Does it relate to all aspects of my life or just some aspects? Well, in this case of the accident, no, it's only some aspects of this person's life that they are disabled from doing, like walking. But they can talk, they can relate. There's other aspects of their life that they can get on with. And the third question is personalisation. Does this relate to just me or does it relate to the general community? So in this case, it is just me. I'm no longer able to walk. I've been disabled, but gee, I can still get out and I can play tennis, I can play basketball, etc. You look at some of the Paralympics and what they have achieved. That is personalised to them and not to the general environment. So by asking those three critical questions, we can discover happiness in life and be grateful for what we are able to do. The third concept of Seligman that he's known for is about authentic happiness, which he described by the acronym of PERMA, and Laura has gone through that with you in great detail. I might add a few practical examples to that, if you don't mind. So positive emotion, that is getting out of Grant's pity party and choosing Laura's positivity. So what Seligman encourages us to do every day is to, at bedtime or at any time, think of three things that went well, that worked well for you in that day. And that could be things like things that you did that you feel proud about, that you've achieved. It could be somebody who has inspired or motivated you and what happened in that experience. Who was it who inspired you? What is it that you've been motivated to do as a result of that? And what has been your significant learning? So we encourage as coaches people to have a journal by their bed, for example, and just take note of three things every day that they would like to hang on to and be grateful for. In terms of engagement, Laura presented that quite specifically. It's about doing what we love and preferentially, as Seligman would say, preferentially using our highest strengths to perform the tasks we love to do that give us great joy and happiness. So in other words, doing what we love to do and loving what we're doing. And we can all relate to people, and hopefully yourself, who go to work loving what you do. And it's not really work, it's just enjoying yourself and loving what you do. That's a great state of engagement. Relationships was something that Laura focused on, and I would support her thoroughly in what she's saying about. And Seligman recommended fine-tuning our positive elements of our relationships. Laura took it even further, and I'll go further still by saying, I would encourage you, and we encourage our clients, to only associate with those people who uplift our life, who are positive influences in our life, even to the point of ring fencing those people in your life that you would like to spend more time with, who really support you, who support your changes in behaviour and attitude and traits, etc. And not really taking much time to associate with those who are negative in your life, who don't support you, who don't uplift you, people who are critical, people who are negative. So yes, we all come across them in our day-to-day lives, and yes, we acknowledge them as individuals, we respect them as individuals, but we don't necessarily take on board what they're saying in terms of their approach to life. Finding meaning, Laura mentioned that, something, a bigger, higher order purpose in life. This is key, I think, to who we are and finding our passion in life and finding purpose and leaving a legacy behind, which is partly why I founded the Australian Institute of Positive Psychology, Positive Coaches, based on positive psychology, because this is what I think will be my legacy in life, to help bring more positive psychology coaches through the system and into all walks of community and corporate life. And lastly, achievement. And Seligman would say that determination counts more than intelligence when it comes to achievement. If we are determined to do something and we put persistence into it and we keep going until we are achieving that, then we have done a good job. So let's now turn to how these principles of positive psychology can impact our coaching practice. And let's look first of all at what is coaching. So coaching is facilitating self-awareness of issues and problems concerning clients in their work and personal life, and goals to be achieved. So it is a supportive and encouraging process that utilises the client's existing knowledge and strengths to help them understand their current situation, broaden their horizon, be open to other possibilities, and lead them towards effective, often creative solutions to their problems. Now, be aware that the coaching process, which I'll call pure coaching, is client-led with no predetermined agenda or outcomes, and the coach has no previous knowledge of the client or the situation. So in other words, a client can walk through the door, you don't know them at all, who they are, where they're from, their work or their family situation. That's what I call pure coaching, and you can help them achieve their goals. There's also performance coaching, which is usually conducted in an organisational setting where there are predetermined agendas and outcomes, and that's another way of coaching. And there's also remedial coaching, which we don't touch as positive psychology coaches. It's usually performed by human resource people with individuals who are going down a dismissal path in an organisation. So what I'm talking about here is really pure coaching, and there are 5 principles underlying positive psychology coaching from this perspective. The first principle is that the coach acknowledges the positive worth of the individual, but not necessarily of their behaviour, because that may be the reason they come to be coached. So, for example, if you have a client coming who's into addiction or abuse, that's not the area of coaching, that's an area of specialist counselling. So you acknowledge them, but you would refer them on to counselling for that specific issue that they're confronting. The second principle of positive psychology coaching is that we believe that clients are doing the best they know how at the time, and they just need the coach's support to do even better. So this comes from that positive psychology belief that people are innately good and trying to meet their needs without taking away from other people's needs, that they're innately good and doing the best they know how at the time. The third principle is that solutions lie within the client, and it's the role of the client to help them discover them. So it's about teasing out their creativity, looking at different opportunities and ways that they can solve the problems that are confronting them, looking at what's worked for them, but also what they have learned from what hasn't worked. And this brings us on to the fourth principle. It's about there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. So when we have found that this didn't work in this context or this situation, what is it we can do when we review that learning? And what is it we can do then to redo or re-experiment so we can find out more and hopefully solve the situation? And the fifth principle of positive psychology coaching is that there is a positive intention motivating every behaviour and a context in which every behaviour has value. And it's up to us to identify the right context for that behaviour, or else to change the behaviour to fit the context in which that client is operating. So the coach enacts these principles by doing things like facilitating, guiding, not advising, not mentoring, not training, not supervising, asking better questions to assist the client to go where they need to go, rather than telling them what they have found useful in their life. It's about motivating, supporting and encouraging, raising the client up and not putting them down, not judging, not reprimanding them, not blaming or recriminating, and about stimulating thought, creativity and discovery. So breaking down limiting beliefs and encouraging the client to adopt new perspectives. So the aim of coaching is to develop that self-awareness that Grant and Laura have been talking about, out of which comes insight. And it's that insight, that aha moment that you want the client to achieve, where they clarify their situation, they clarify the values that they hold dear, and encourage them to utilise their strengths and not even think about their weaknesses. Coaches don't coach to weaknesses, they coach to strengths. And of course, the coach is working to some basic assumptions at that stage, which relate to the fact that the client is ready to change and learn new behaviours. The client is willing to take risks to learn their new behaviours and possibly fail, which we know is all about getting feedback. That the client has the cognitive ability to self-reflect and self-review. And of course, that's the aim of coaching and the aim of social emotional intelligence, that you want the client to be able to self-review based and develop new self-awareness. That the fourth one is about the client has the skills to follow through on their actions and know, and if they haven't got the skills or the resources, they know where to get them from. Next, we work on the basic assumption that the client has a level of maturity to cope with and manage their new behaviour and possibly new emotions that arise around that new behaviour in the current context, and to work with that new behaviour and new environment and new emotions to integrate that into what they need to do in the future as they go forward. So looking at those principles of positive psychology, let's now look at how those principles guide the practice of coaching. This is the model of coaching that I've developed and that we have, that we teach our students in our institution. It places 2 steps in front of the traditional grow model, which is important to the success of the coaching session. And I'll tell you why. Because they set up the expectations of how coaching will be conducted and the outcomes that can be achieved from coaching. So the first step in the coach model includes the identification of the critical issue that has brought the client to coaching, which is often a problem to be resolved or a goal to be achieved. It assists clients gain clarity on their situation, and it relates to those 4 areas that I mentioned right at the beginning of this presentation. We understand the content of the situation for the client, what's happening for them, the context in which it's happening, the impact on them of the situation, and we also understand their feelings. As well as that, we look at what they have done to resolve the situation and what has worked and what hasn't. There's no judgment, there's no right or wrong. The coach simply listens to the client's story, gets to understand it, and identify the client's coaching needs. If there is a presenting concern that needs to be teased out, the client will delve further and may have to cycle back if that presenting concern leads to deeper issues. The second step is called opportunities, and it involves identifying the goal the client wants to achieve. That is the reason they have come to be coached, and the opportunities that are available to them to achieve this goal. Now, the goal may be specific, such as the client may say to you, I want to save up for a home deposit, for example. Or it could be unclear, which is often the case. I want a better life. The role of the coach is to have the client identify their goal in 8 to 10 words and make it smart. The fewer words, the better, and support the client's creativity to discover the opportunities available to them that they never thought possible. The third step is similar to the GROW model in that the client identifies actions they need to take to achieve the desired outcome. So this is the logical, rational step that only when they get to that step, if they're emotional, don't go there until you've fully explored their emotions with them and helped them to settle down. And remember that once they get to that logical, rational step, the client takes the actions, not the coach. And it's only when the client is absolutely out of action that the coach can intervene and maybe with their permission make some suggestions. The fourth and final step are important additions to the GROW model as well, because they test the client's commitment to taking the actions and identify any possible barriers that need to be addressed before the client practices the new behaviours in their current climate. They place the responsibility for taking action firmly with just the client, but the accountability lies jointly with both the client and the coach. So let's look now at how positive psychology principles apply to coaching practice. Firstly, and there are 5 of them, positive psychology coaching practice aims to reframe the client's mental model of the world from one that is against them into one that is for them, a negative into a positive, and understand how they can take action to create a more positive future. The coach challenges the client's mental model, their underlying assumptions and limiting beliefs, to create an understanding of how they can do things right. Now, if you look at self-determination theory, it proposes that we are in charge of our own thoughts and feelings, and as such, we determine our future. Our personal goals are windows to our well-being as well as our future. Coaches aim to put clients back into the driver's seat, back into control of their life. The second way we practice positive psychology principles is by looking at clients and their mental mindset. A positive mental mindset influences what clients believe they can do rather than what they cannot do. A fundamental tenet of positive psychology is to focus on strengths to promote learning, growth, well-being and happiness. So coaches work with clients' strengths and don't even consider their weaknesses unless they are hindering progress. A coaching mindset believes in the absolute ability of each individual to create their future as they would want it to be, with encouragement and support from the coach and a healthy dose of realism as well. Third, mindfulness. Mindfulness is the ability that we want to develop in clients so that they notice, they pay attention to and focus on the things that are going right. So they are fully present in the moment with any thought of the past or the future. So we encourage the client to practice mindfulness so that increases their self-awareness, insight, they're able to self-regulate and become more resilient in their life. Fourthly, we look at their self-efficacy. That is their ability to believe in themselves and get past their current limiting beliefs and their failures, and look at what they can do in the future to learn from their past mistakes. Finally, the fifth way we can practice positive psychology coaching is by being open and encouraging the client to be open, honest and flexible to explore and discover anything new in their life and the environment, how they grow, how they absolute trust in their coach and themselves, as the coach uses skills of active and reflective listening to understand their situation and identify their coaching needs from what the client is saying, but also to use powerful questioning to summarize and surface what they're not saying, what's under the deep subconscious assumptions and beliefs that they're making, and how they can create new learnings from that. Altogether, there's no denial, there's no justification or externalization of blame as the coach works with clients to simply have them accept responsibility for who they are, where they've come from, and what they need to do to determine their future outcomes. So those are the 5 ways that we practice positive psychology coaching. I'll now just summarize and finish off by saying that, in summary, positive psychology coaching aims to assist clients understand their inner world and how it relates to the external world. It helps clients shift their mental model and mindset and learn new ways of behaving and operating in their environment to solve their own problems and achieve their goals. The outcome is that clients lead a fuller, richer and happier life, whatever that may be for them, which will be different for each person. So thank you for listening to this presentation. I hope it has given you food for thought and maybe generated some observations or questions.
Fantastic. So can you just stop sharing your slides? That'd be fantastic so that we can see you. That's excellent. And I've just asked everyone to drop their questions in. There's been a few questions going as we've been going along. People are thanking you for your presentation. And yeah, so another, I'm just going to keep an eye on that there. You know, what I really loved about it, the conversations that I was having while Susanne was talking to us, is that people are really seeing this from a few different perspectives. This is what we wanted, you know. So just because you may not be a coach, and there was a number of coaches there, or there were people that are inspired now to become a coach, what I really do in my own life, even though I am a coach, is I love how you can take the principles of coaching and you can actually just use them in your own life. So self-coaching, I believe, is the greatest area of coaching. Okay, now there is a need for external help and support and coaching, particularly around things like accountability. There were people that were picking up on that. However, you can get yourself to the position of wanting to be coached, of needing to be coached, then applying those principles. So what am I saying there? The stuff that Susanne was just taking us through, we can use that in our daily life, which is what we want to empower you with in this summit. Right now, you'll be having some thoughts, you'll be having some mindsets, some behaviors that aren't serving you, and they're based on the world and the circumstance and where you are right now. So the ability for you to be able to apply the principles of positive psychology and coaching for yourself is going to help you to navigate that. Laura. So then the next thing that was coming up there is people were asking questions around things like, you know, where do we draw the line? Does a positive psychology practitioner only talk about the positive? And the only answer that I could come up with, and I'll get your answer here, was that no, they're well balanced. However, and they don't just focus on the, you know, the positive side of things at all, because it's that recognition that there are negative things going on. But my understanding is it's using the positive to navigate that negative. What will you add to that?
Thank you. Yes, and thank you for your questions. Very important. I'll address that one first, and then I'd like to go back to the first question that you mentioned, Ralph. Positive psychology doesn't only address the positive. However, the clients that we work with tend to be well functioning in their everyday life. There's no mental issues related to them. And if there are, what we suggest is that there's an immediate referral to counselling and psychologists to actually look at those issues, which are deep-seated. And there may be. And of course, coaching may surface some of those deep-seated issues. So, for example, I know Grant was talking earlier about his early life. And if that comes up when you're coaching someone and it becomes a real issue, they may need to have some counselling around their early life. So don't be afraid to surface that issue. But also, I would recommend that if you're not trained, don't go any further than that. Please just immediately refer on to someone who's got the expertise. Otherwise, you could be creating damage and you could be becoming part of the problem, not the solution. Okay, can I just go back to the first person too about these principles of positive psychology? Anyone can apply to their life anywhere, anytime, in any interaction. And that's the beauty of coaching. It's like it's becoming a profession. It's like a meta profession. You know, it's like someone sitting on your shoulder, saying, looking at you and saying, what am I doing now? It's about asking yourself those questions. Is what I'm doing now effective? Is it helping others? Is it helping me? And if it's not, what do I need to do about it to change that behaviour? So I think the ultimate goal of coaching is to get people to a point where they self-reflect and they self-coach. Because what you don't want to do as a coach is you don't want to create dependency on yourself as a coach. And that can happen. And this, from a counselling perspective, and I've done counselling, I was into short-term counselling. I never wanted to go into long-term therapy, because then it takes control from the client. You always want to give control back to the person. You want to put them back in the driver's seat to understand their life and their issues. And then you want them to have I know what I need to do. And so it's about them. It's not about the coach. It's not about you. So when we go into organisations and we teach coaching skills to leaders and to employees, it's not about you. You're the sounding board. You're the person who holds the mirror up to other people. And they can then say, when you reflect back to them what they've said, oh, was that what I really said? I really didn't mean that. Or, gee, that gives me an insight into what my life is like. Perhaps I need to make some changes.
Fantastic. Yeah, look, totally agree. And I love how you say that. It's not about taking the reins and keeping hold of them. It's about guiding and navigating. And I see myself as a coach, and I do operate as a mentor as well. But I see the difference there is that I like to call I'm like a tour guide, bringing them to the next insight that they can then make a decision about. And the benefit for that I see as well is, yeah, because codependency is a challenge, where people just keep going back to their therapist or whatever every single month, and then they're just about finished, and the buzzer goes off, and they go, okay, we'll see you again next week. The benefit as well, though, of getting someone to their own realization is they're more likely to do something about it, because we don't like to be told what to do. We don't like to be managed. So I love how a coach can bring, and I love to see the lights come on people's eyes when they get an insight, and they. I was dealing with a gentleman just last few weeks who had a major issue that he didn't realize that he had, in terms of his thinking and his belief, and he was in his 60s. To see someone be able to go, wow, I have opened myself up to the coaching, which has allowed me to get that insight and then make a change in my life. That's an amazing gift. So thank you so much. So, Susanne, thank you very much from the bottom of our hearts for what you've shared with us today. I love how you gave the distinctions between, the normal understanding of psychology and the different levels or different parts of psychology, and then how positive psychology comes in from a different perspective. It's not about an either or, it's about an and. So I love that. And I love how, taking people through a model, a logical journey that they can go on, helps them to be able to navigate and overcome things in their life. So thank you so much. Let's give Susanne a big round of applause once again. And there have been people asking for slides and this, that, and the other. I will be sending out a correspondence, an email to everyone. So make sure that you stay subscribed so that you get those. And we'll make some things available with the recordings that are going to be up for a week or so anyway. So thank you so much, Susanne. And I look forward to having a chat with you a bit later. And let's everyone show their appreciation right now in the chats. Let's give us some love, and we shall move on to the next part of our summit.